Chapter 12. I can only hope history will forgive me for not detailing more of our dinner. But I just couldn't. I can't. Focus was no longer possible for me. It was like the weight of century after century of emptiness crashed down on me all at once. Is it any wonder humans could grab hold of our hearts so easily? They, after all, still had theirs. But we for all our power, all our wealth, all our material means, could not even do this. Sit down with people who cared about us, and enjoy something prepared by someone with a passion for their craft beyond just making it efficient. Efficiency, or even endurance, isn't the height of quality I once believed it to be. I was wrong. We were wrong. And as minutes were born and died, in my mind I was replaying all the missed opportunities in our history and in my whole life up until my arrival on Earth. This is where I believe my professor was wrong, at least in part. It wasn't just that humans could teach us the meaning and power of family. It was that they had ordered their society in such a way as to let people give meaning to their very lives. Or at least they were trying to. Our wartime way of life never returned to being peacetime. And if I were to make a guess as to when that would change if nothing imposed that change, well, to borrow an old human phrase, it would happen right around the 15th of Never, or the 30th of February, whichever came first. By the time I paid the charge and we stood up from the table, I was well and truly resolved to assisting Bao with what she asked for. And whether she liked me or not, there was no way I was going to turn her in, though I doubt she believed me when I said that. "Where are you staying tonight?" I asked her when the family stood up. "There's a bridge I saw that isn't too far from your home. One night outdoors won't hurt me," Bao replied, only for William to speak up. "Absolutely not. You're Bailey's sister. We're not going to let you stay under a bridge," he answered, and then added, "We have a perfectly good couch. Sleep there. Maybe we can do a movie night or something." "Movie night. That sounds vaguely familiar," I said, and glanced at my sister, then at Bosun, then at Bonnie Red. She was the only one to know. "Everybody gets together and watches a movie. It's a lot of fun. Captain Archer did one with us when we arrived on his ship. It's how I was introduced to Earth's pirate past." Her tail was already wagging when she said that, and she adjusted her hat to give it a little tilt. Predictably, as we got up to leave, she drew attention. She had, after all, been the first of our species to land a ship on Earth, and she had been a player in the first broadcast game of Ballyball. So when she rose to her feet to leave, she began to get attention. I suppose it was nothing less than a miracle that she hadn't drawn attention on entry. All it really took was one person. "Hey, it's the pirate doggo!" It was a child that said it, and all I really wanted was to get out of there before it got chaotic. I still wasn't fond of big crowds. The restaurant was one thing. Being suddenly crowded by a bunch of people was another, and I knew what was coming. I had seen human films after all. It still galls me centuries later that what I realized that evening hadn't occurred to me before it did. But at that moment it was time to go. I think Bonnie recognized my anxiety, though I hadn't the will to ask her. It didn't really matter if she did it for my sake, or just because she did like the attention. She stood aside and slipped into her pirate voice. "Aye, that be me land lubbin' lass. Do you fancy an autograph? Sign your shirt, or would you like a selfie?" With a subtle motion, she waved us toward the door as people began to close in around her. "Selfie, please. Oh, and can you also sign my shirt?" the girl asked, and Bonnie did her imitation of a human laugh. "Greedy as a pirate you are, lass. A girl after me own heart." I'd reached the exit by then, and missed whatever else was said. I got out ahead of the rest of them. Strangely, Bao didn't hurry as much as I did, which isn't to say she was slow, but rather that she didn't have the same haste as myself. It's hard not to feel like a coward in moments like that, when everyone else is fine and I can barely keep my head on straight. The walkers assured me that I wasn't, and I'm grateful to them for everything. But it's hard not to feel like a coward when you're the only one anxious, and everyone else seems to think nothing is wrong at all. Cowardice is hardest of all on the cowards themselves, I suppose. Bao spoke up as the door closed behind Boatswain, who was the last to leave the restaurant. "Will she be all right alone?" Nobody answered. Bao seemed to realize what she'd asked, and brought her hand up to her snout, looked down at the ground, and dragged her thumb and forefinger down to the tip of her nose with a sigh. That was a profoundly stupid question, and as far as I'm concerned, I never asked it. Agreed, we said at once. I fully expected her to show up early the next morning hungover and vowing to drink even more next time. Whatever can be said of the Pirate Queen, she didn't ever lack commitment to whatever she was doing. It wasn't until we piled back into the car to go back to the Walker home that I realized something quite unfortunate, that Bonnie Red would not be sitting in my lap on the way home. Chapter 13. My mind was pretty well a mess by the time we got home. though I did my best to make sure nobody noticed. The fact that it was dark out definitely helped hide that fact. Humans have very poor night vision without augmentation. I wondered if Byron was an exception. Humans had been modifying their soldiers for a long time. It wouldn't surprise me if his vision actually did work well at night. But even if it were, he was focused on the job right then, which meant I could be insularly focused. I was replaying every moment of history that I knew of from my own life, and from what I learned of my species' history since the chaotic age. For those who are not students of galactic history, some 1800 years ago was a time of general chaos and war. A lot of species gained interstellar travel within decades or centuries of each other, and began to explore. Some did so with remote vessels, some did so with crewed vessels. But the response to an inhabited galaxy full of neighbors was reactionary. Violence begat violence, and prey-evolved species, I may be voicing bias here, seemed to lash out to excess at predator-evolved species. And since Dlamacans are particularly dangerous-looking as well as dangerous in fact, peace was hard to make. From what I knew with my limited education in history, our entire world militarized and centered around production of ships, weapons, advanced technology, and modifying our soldiers. Dissidents were seen as threats to victory. Everything was set into the preservation of our species from the violence of those who were terrified of us. We were not wholly innocent, I am sure. But the fact is, not every species that existed then exists today. Their cold, dead worlds remain a silent monument to the past. I suppose that since a generation of us came of age and spent decades at war, and all that didn't serve the war effort was scrapped or warehoused, or simply forgotten, we just never changed back. Even at the time of writing this first edition, the truth is we came perilously close to another time of war, not but a few decades earlier. Arguably, the very first great accomplishment of humanity was done by complete accident. Their arrival into the galactic community and the destruction of the Zenti raiders to rescue a passenger ship on which my own professor rode before he ever met a human, gave the community pause and let us all step back. The subsequent reputation that humans built for essentially having murder fuel in their veins instead of blood also had a hand in that reluctance. The night of our car ride back to the Walker home, I didn't know how much of a role the first face-to-face contact between Dlamasan and human had in our peaceful coexistence in the present. But as you now live in a time of peace, at least if you read the finished copy of this text, we now all know it proved important. Humanity gave the galaxy some breathing room, being both neutral, with no past history of war, and with a great capacity for military violence. By the time we reached what I happily call home, I was convinced of one thing in particular. It was time for us to open up, to draw back from our stiff ways of self-defeating misery and struggle to just be productive until we die. It was time for us to live again, and not just us, but all our species that lived in the shadow of wars and rumors of wars, whispered in the halls of governments throughout the void. And I believed one more thing, that if I could help Bao, if I could get Dlamius to undertake an act of goodwill without an eye toward profit, to genuinely assist a group of humans living in fear and in want, that the Earth government would put their feet firmly on a path to a true and formal alliance. Humans show their generosity of spirit first, and both trust and affection flow from that. So it was with Percival, his giving toward the Walker house and his grandfatherly view of young Fove. So it was with Byron, who bonded with Bosun, giving him the first good time he'd probably ever had. Bao, though, wasn't thinking on such a grand scale. I was sure of that much. She was looking out the window the whole drive back, in the direction of the ruins of Chicago, I believe. She was thinking of her humans, nothing more. I know because if it were the Walkers and I were in her place, I would be thinking the same. She was coming to me for help, but I believed there was far more possible than she realized, and I was going to make that happen. Further reflection on that note was briefly set aside as my datapad buzzed while we were walking up the steps toward the house. "What is it?" Fove asked. She was trying to keep the anxiousness out of her voice, but even with everything settled and my stay on Earth assured, I know she was worried about the other shoe dropping. I could hardly blame her. Every time it seemed like all was well, something else went wrong. Besides, she didn't really have a good grasp on Dlamasan political structure. Once the university had issued its judgment, going back on it would make the entire school look wishy-washy and weak to a planet that is not used to second-guessing itself or its policies. Offending my home planet by raising the same issue twice after it was settled with them once simply was not going to happen. Not unless I did something stupid, perhaps assisting my fugitive sister, instead of turning her in for a very serious crime of illegal immigration assistance, while also having a hand in the illegal migration of Dlamasan athletes would count. No, there is no perhaps. It would count. It did count. But it wouldn't matter unless I got caught. That's an outlier thought. I told myself, and you know what? I was okay with that. And as for the message, well, that was just fantastic news, which I badly needed right about then. Chapter 14. So, movie night? I guess we can go ahead and start. Who knows how long Red will be, William said as we filed in. I made a mental note of the nickname he'd given her. Red. Humans are particular about names. It confuses many a first-year anthropology student so much that they switch to studying a different species entirely. Recalling my initial studies in university, a student from a species I wasn't familiar with said this. So they get a name from their family history. They get a name for themselves. Then, they sometimes change their family name due to long-term mating, but sometimes don't. But also they have middle names that they don't use unless they want to, but also add numbers to mark generations. And on top of that, they also get names from the ones they're most familiar with. But those names can change whenever they make a new group of companions, and a Homo sapien might change his name just because he wants to. I quit. None of us thought poorly of the one who moved on to a different species. Nicknames come in two forms of representation: hatred or camaraderie. Telling the difference was based on direct observation of the named individual. If they expressed signs of sadness or anger at the name, it was given out of mockery, a means of gaining power over the other person, and enjoy the ability to hurt them with a word. If done in affection, the named individual basked in that warmth and expressed happiness to see the person using it. Both forms of use express a kind of friendly intimacy, but where one was violating and cruel, the other was affectionate and almost familial. Homing in on the understanding of the power humans gave to names was surprisingly easy for me, though I can't say exactly why. So what did William's casual use of the name Red say about how he saw her? Captain Bonnie Red was definitely an outlier. She had an even easier time than I in human society, even if we take into account her early familiarity with the species. But there was more to it than that. She had charisma. When she gave orders, she expected them to be followed. Where she led, her sailors followed. When she spoke, people listened, even humans. She was able to show direct and immediate interest in total strangers and greeted a whole planet like they were friends who had been away for a long time. Maybe she should have been our ambassador to Earth. I suppose in a way she was. But in that moment, thinking of William's casual assigning of a shortened name to her, I think it said he saw her as a friend. "But what do we watch?" Rebecca asked while she walked past into the kitchen to relieve the babysitter and see to Michael. Something animated. "Oh, I know the perfect one. I read about it in my film history class," Fauve chimed in. "Then I'll get the popcorn and soda." William offered while the rest of us made ourselves comfortable. Chairs were moved around, seats were claimed on the couch, and the coffee table moved into place while Fauve went through the streaming channels. She could have done it by voice command alone, but I believe she wanted it to be a surprise. She was bobbing back and forth and humming the anime tune from before, while my sister looked at her and the rest of the house with a confused kind of awe. It wasn't until I nodded to her and said, "Sit," in a pitch the human ear could not have heard, that Bao claimed a seat on the couch. The smell of popcorn was thick in the air, but no sooner did the microwave beep than Fauve used the household intercom and shouted, "Dadu, can we get the Dadu extra special butter? Is there another way to have popcorn, Fauvekins?" he shouted back to her from the kitchen. "These humans are very loud," Bao remarked offhandedly. "These can afford to be," Boatswain said with the passive confidence of our hulking behemoths. "Mine can't be. They worry about causing collapses in the buildings, or cave-ins in the tunnels, or dangerous creatures that have settled in the area." This is like what they call heaven," Bao replied. "And it wasn't as hard for me to picture as you would think. I didn't always know I wanted to study humans. Before settling on them, I was looking at other species and learning some of the histories of the worlds and peoples to rise up to travel the stars. Out of all these places, humans have perhaps the most singularly hostile place for life. Not for nothing are they considered death-worlders. Just the fact that they breathe a corrosive and explosive gas that is produced by plants that ingest a toxic gas sets them apart. They don't even have any capexium in their atmosphere to make it any safer. All those who live today are the survivors of apocalyptic nightmares many times over. And yet on a world like this one, they have taken hell and turned it into heaven. I should show more academic disinterest and detachment toward this work, but by this time, during the third in my series of journals spanning my life on Earth, I'd come to love them. I cannot be as indifferent as I should be, and that too is why I was willing to help Bao when she asked. The microwave beeped a second time and my ears flicked as I heard William and Rebecca walk toward the social space they refer to as a living room, and the smell of popcorn grew even greater rivaled only by the fragrant scent of melted butter. What Fauve referred to as Dadu extra special butter turned out to be buttered popcorn, on which more butter had been poured after melting it, thus adding fresh, moist, heated butter to the already butter-flavored popcorn. It made some popcorn pieces shrivel up. It had others cluster together around a less than completely melted bit of butter that was poured a little too soon into the oversized white bowl. It was a mess, and would make our fur sticky as could be, and it smelled delicious, and had all of us salivating. "Here we go, a 20th century retelling of the Hunchback of Notre Dame," Fauve proclaimed. "That's Notre Dame, Fauve," Rebecca corrected her daughter. "I said what I said, Mom." Fauve retorted with a smug look that said, "I'm taunting you, and you can't get mad." "Teenagers," Rebecca muttered as the movie played. Bao listened to that in silent curiosity, and watched the animated film with the utmost interest. If my world had any history of animated films in its distant past, I didn't know of it. While the principles of animation were easy to understand, fast-moving still pictures created an optical illusion. The artistry and process of using it for storytelling was not something I knew of outside of Earth. Bao could not look away from it, nor could Bosun, and neither could I. However, the impact of it on Bao was not completely obvious to me, until we listened to the character of Esmeralda singing "God Help the Outcasts," begging for help that was not forthcoming. It was times like that in which I wished my species had the capacity to shed tears.